The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good to have you with us. Good to be here. Good to be alive. Anyway, good evening, Lang.
Hi, Wayne.
This is a live call-in show, so if you'd like, you could call in and share your thoughts and questions and comments on the topics of the evening. 343-9927, 343-9927. Call in and tell you what you think. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit, Lang and I. Oh, Lang Baker, by the way, I said hello to you, but I needed to introduce you as the formality. Good evening.
Howdy.
Anyway, tonight we're going to talk about the current legislative session and some of the bills that Governor John Bel Edwards has proposed and is trying to get, debated and passed in the legislature. And Lang, I looked at family values and criminal justice reform and a little bit at the taxes, and you looked a lot at the taxes, and I think that's what a lot of people are interested in.
There's a lot to tackle there, and it's just getting started. As you know, taxes and budget issues have brought the legislature back in the special sessions as we've come up short in the middle of the fiscal year, and
Seriously
so they're
yes.
trying to devise a stable, reliable revenue stream to meet the needs of the state without having to have more of these special sessions. So in Louisiana, tax bills have to start in the House and they go first to the House Ways and Means Committee. So that's where these bills will all be starting off. And from what I've seen, there's like over 140 bills been introduced on taxes already. And yesterday, the committee was holding hearings on bills affecting the personal income tax. And today, corporate income tax, and tomorrow they're planning to look over some bills affecting sales tax. But they aren't taking any votes yet because they need to wait for some fiscal notes to give them projections on just what the fiscal impact of these bills will be. So they're just looking over the landscape of what's been introduced and trying to see how different pieces will fit together and what kind of a comprehensive plan they'll be able to fashion out of all these 140 plus bills that have been introduced.
Let me guess. The Democrats say that the tax increases will have milk and honey flowing through the streets, and the Republicans are saying that it will destroy us and drive all the jobs out of the state.
I don't think they're that clear-cut demarcation between the two.
Well.
There's a lot of nuance in what a number of the members are saying, and then there are some who take more doctrinaire, hard positions on, like there's some that are saying it has to all be through cuts, and then the governor's response was, well, then show me what hospitals you want to shut down, what educational institutions you want to shut down, what roads you don't want repaired or built in your district, and we can talk. But,
and there was one representative I heard on Louisiana Public. Oops, not supposed to mention our so-called competitors. Anyway, that I heard on the radio the other day, who was apparently it was a phone conversation. He was calling in into someplace, and she ranting and shouting that there is plenty of money in our budget. It's there. We don't need to raise taxes. And I'm like, the governor was. It's like, okay, show us where. Give us some details.
Yeah. Well, there's been in the news what the pieces of the governor's proposal are, and he's still working on some of it. He said in one report I saw recently, it'll be a couple of weeks before he gets it finalized in what he wants to present, because he wants to talk to, I suppose, the various affected parties and try to come up with something that'll be acceptable and has a chance of success. Because any revenue matter like this is going to take a 2/3 vote, which means 70 out of the 105 members of the state legislature on the House side will have to approve it. And then part of what he wants to propose will have to go through, or at least what he's proposing to go through, a form of constitutional amendment, which require approval of 2/3 of both houses and a popular vote on that portion of it. But there are elements in there addressing both the sales tax. They talk about the fiscal cliff the middle of next year. 1 penny of the sales tax that was passed by a special session to fill the last budget hole back in the last year automatically expires in the middle of next year. So that's gonna blow a big hole in the finances if they don't come up with something to replace that. So that's part of what the governor's package is trying to address.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the government said, we've already shut down the charity hospitals, and we've cut way back in the funding for LSU and for TOPS and everything. And what more can we do, especially when that sales tax expires? Yeah,
well, it's interesting the comment that you heard on the radio from one citizen, but there's been a survey done by a department out at LSU this year. It's called the 2017 Louisiana Survey, and was a project of the Riley Center for Media and Public Affairs at LSU's Manship School of Mass Communication, and it shows the people are more specific in what they're willing to raise taxes for and what they're opposed to it. According to this survey, which polled over 1,000 adult Louisiana residents and has a margin of error of about 3 percentage points, the majority, 62%, were willing to support raising taxes for funding elementary and secondary education. And 59% were in favor of raising taxes to fund higher education. You mentioned LSU having suffered all these cuts and TOPS, And 53% would support it for health care and 57% for transportation infrastructure, which the gasoline tax proposal, which is separate from the package the governor's putting together. That's a separate bill that's already, I think that's already been presented in another bill. But the people, however, are not interested in raising taxes expended on prisons and incarceration, nor are they willing to raise taxes for welfare, food stamps, and other public assistance programs.
Right. Because all those people are just lazy anyway, right?
Well, there's part of what you're going to be talking about in terms of wage issues. I mean, that's a big part. I mean, most of the people receiving food stamps are working, but their wages just aren't high enough to
make it.
Yeah,
a libertarian friend of mine, back when I was heavily involved with the libertarian movement, so to speak, he was fond of pointing that out. He was of a different wing of the libertarian movement, I guess, but he was saying, hey, people don't realize how many of their neighbors are getting government assistance. We just don't see it, and that's true, and we don't realize. Most of us don't realize just how heavily involved government is at all levels of our economy, and you can't just cut it out, without causing some serious negative consequences. But most of the people, like you said, that receive assistance, government assistance, are actually working. There's the stereotypical, welfare queen driving a Cadillac, as Ronald Reagan said, is just not there. I mean, I'm sure that there is some abuse, just as there is everywhere, but that's not shown to be the rule, really.
Yeah, well, you can see instances of abuse up and down the economic scale.
Yes. Yes, everywhere in all aspects, including business, private business, the free market, that kind of thing.
The Wall Street bandits.
Yep. One of the things I did find interesting with the governor's proposal on the taxes was his commercial activity tax. And I think he was going to implement that, or he wants to implement that, in replace of the business income tax, was it?
Well, not anymore. That may have been earlier, but from what I've been reading here recently, they would phase out the corporate franchise tax, and they would that would supposedly cover what's lost when the penny sales tax goes away. And then there's also some reform to sales tax structure that's going to be in his proposal, where a lot of the exemptions from the sales tax would be gone, but the sales tax would be lowered to the 4-cent state, and then the base would be expanded to some other items, some services instead of just on goods.
Okay.
But the corporate or the commercial activities tax, the CAT tax, what he's proposing would only impact something like 6% of the businesses in the state to a significant degree.
To a significant,
yeah. Any business that has less than $1.5 million would just be paying a flat fee of I think it's $250 a year
to $750. It's a sliding
Okay.
range. I wanted to make it clear though to the listeners, to anybody who is interested, that the commercial activity tax is a tax on gross receipts, and that's just on gross revenues. It's not net revenue,
Yeah.
So if they have a low tax margin, a low profit margin, it could be.
Yeah, I think one thing I read is that's something that the governor and his team are looking into and trying to come up with their final version that they want to present in a couple of weeks.
Okay, good. You were going to say something more on that?
No, I haven't seen any details on
Okay.
how that is, but that is something that they're going to try to address.
Yeah, I'm looking at an article from the New Orleans Times-Picayune from April 7th, and they're stating here that, like you said, the CAT will be subjected to, not every business will be paying the same rate. Businesses that have between $150,000 and $1.5 million in gross receipts would pay a flat tax of $250 to $750 a year. And then there are two other grades. Businesses with between $1.5 and $3 million in gross receipts would have to pay a 0.35% tax with the availability of some tax breaks. And then anybody that's above $3 million would just pay the straight 0.35%. And I got to looking, and I'm kind of pleased. Well, I am pleased, that apparently the governor or his people looked at what other states have been doing regarding taxes, and there are 3 other states in the country that have commercial activities taxes, and I found some information on Ohio's, and they have the Ohio Society of CPAs, Certified Public Accountants. Whew, I'll bet they have some awesome parties, huh? But they formed an Ohio Tax Reform Task Force in June of 2016, and they evaluated Ohio's commercial activities tax, and they were generally favorable. They said it was very effective, and the big benefit was that it provided stable revenue each year. it was just a nice, predictable revenue, which is what I think the governor is looking for. The things they said here, though, and there can be quote here. The primary benefit of Ohio's is its uniform. It is uniform. Okay, it's across the board. It has a low rate of 0.26%, which is significantly lower than Governor Edwards' proposed 0.35. Its base is broad and exemptions are few, and compliance is simple. And they say here that those are the main points that make it effective. And we're violating some of those things already with the proposal. We're creating different categories or different levels of taxation, and we have a significantly higher proposed rate. So I don't know, how all this is going to play out, but at least they were looking at other states and how they're doing things and trying to find better ways to generate stable revenue.
Yeah, well, one thing with just the flat fee below $1.5 million of revenues, that exempts a lot of businesses from any kind of complex paperwork to comply. And for the total number of businesses in the state, 6% of them would fall into the above $1.5 million threshold. So 94% of the businesses wouldn't be.
They'd be paying a flat rate, basically.
Yeah. And one of the rationales for trying to go this route is the idea of tax fairness. The corporate, I mean, corporations don't account for all the businesses. A lot of businesses aren't corporations, but the corporate income tax filers, in 2015, 87% of the filers paid no taxes. So there was no revenue coming in from the corporate income tax from 87% of the corporations that file returns in our state. So that hits to the fairness thing, which is also something that is an issue with the public at large about fairness in the tax system.
Right.
You know,
all over the country, really, but
yeah, and which includes the people here with how the state system's working.
yeah. You're listening to A Pause for Thought with Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here, coming to you from Baton Rouge Community Radio in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You can call in 343-9927, 343-9927. Tell us what you think about taxes and increasing them, and some of these other things, too, that we're going to move on and talk about. We could probably come back to taxes in a moment, Lang.
Sure.
But when I looked at the government's proposals, the first thing that hit me was his family values section or whatever. And I found it very interesting that in the paragraph, the prefacing paragraph that he apparently wrote or had one of his people write, states here that he wants to advance policies, and I'm quoting here, advance policies that value Louisiana families in very practical and real ways. And I had to wonder, speculate or whatever, if maybe he was kind of throwing a little bit of a dig at the other more widely known ways of improving or protecting family values, such as opposition to marriage equality and anti-discrimination for people for their sexual orientation, the ideological presumption that everyone can obtain what they need if only they work harder, and and the failure to understand that hard work isn't the only factor. There's job availability, a lack of transportation to and from work, racial and gender discrimination, all those things there. He's talking about very real and practical ways, such as ending the gender gap for women. And I was surprised to see that Louisiana has the highest gap between what women make and men make. In fact, women make 66 cents for every dollar that a man makes. And I'd
for the
like
same work. For the same
for the
work.
same work, yeah, for the same work. And I'd like for someone to tell me why a woman should be paid less than a man for the same job. I mean, I don't understand that. And I think one of the things, too, is that I think a lot of problems is that a lot of men don't believe it's all true, or they are able to very quickly rationalize it to defend their ideology, which I did back before when I was an ideologue. But, that's something that's very real. And Governor Edwards mentions that we have a lot of single mothers working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And here again, we've got people out there who are obviously working hard, who hopefully are getting some kind of government assistance,
the biggest government assistance they could have would be a government regulation of the livable wage.
Yeah, and we never did get around to talking about how one would determine what, in fact, a living wage is, but maybe someday we will. But yeah, we don't even have a state minimum wage, do we?
Not from what I was reading today. We're one of 5 states that don't have a state minimum wage.
One of 5, okay, yeah.
Although don't ask me what those other 4 are.
Okay, well, yeah, and actually I missed part of this quote concerning single mothers. Our state leads the nation in single-family households living in poverty. We lead the nation in that. We lead it in incarceration rates. We are with the highest rates in the world, and of course, America is the highest country in the world for incarceration rates, the land of the free, But anyway, there's another bill, House Bill 222, authored by Representative Helena Moreno, a Democrat from District 93, that would promote pay transparency by prohibiting employers from taking actions against employees for inquiring about, discussing, or disclosing their wages or those of other employees. Employers apparently now are punishing people if they tell their coworkers what they're making and ask them what they're making.
Yeah, employers may
May, right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And I suspect there's some reason for her coming up with this. And that's one thing with the gender gap. It enables them to keep that sort of thing because, businesses do want to save money. And if they can get away with paying some people less, they're going to. I mean, I don't mean to cast them as evil and mean, but they got, especially small businesses, they've got to make ends meet too. But, the attitude that implies of punishing employees reminds me of the days not too long ago in America. Well, actually, it was 100 years ago, but the labor practices that we saw in right around the turn of the last century, late 19th century, early 20th century, where in factories the fire exits would be chained shut to keep employees from sneaking out and taking unauthorized breaks. The bathrooms were located in the center of the shop floor and only had 3-foot-high walls or whatever, so everybody could see who was in there, and thus prevent people from going in there and goofing off. It's just this paranoid, cynical attitude toward the workers, and to go after them and try to police their conversations about their wages just seems to me to reflect that old-time attitude there that was not a good time for labor in America.
Yeah, well, there was it the Lily Ledbetter case that was thrown out on appeal because she didn't file within a short period of time after she was first subjected to discriminatory wages, and the reason she didn't file was because she didn't find out about it until years later, and so
Yeah.
it's like if you can be fired for asking a question that reveals that you're being discriminated against, it's like a catch-22.
Yes, indeed. And and here again, it's not knowing about it. I mean, how many things that go on that we don't know about, and how many laws are passed that we could benefit from if we only knew them, or like I said, more information. If she had known she was getting discriminated against, she would have been able to say something.
Maybe more comprehensively, we need a new freedom of speech provision that protects freedom of speech not just from government interference but from employer interference.
Yeah, well, then there's the argument that if you want to work for a business, that you have to obey their rules, and if you don't want to obey those rules, you could just go home and starve.
Yeah, if you want to operate a business in our society, then you have to follow society's rules. If you don't like it, then
yeah, I've come to
elsewhere.
like that attitude too, because since I became a human being, right after I shrugged off my right-wing ideology. But anyhow. I did want to point out, too, that Senator Troy Carter, a Democrat from District 7, is proposing a state minimum wage of $8.50 to be phased in over a 2-year period. And that amounts to a gross income of $340 a week. Rent for a decent place to live in Baton Rouge is over $1,000 a month. So, like you can see, I mean, I realize, they don't want to jump in and raise the minimum rate, but that just shows how people are struggling in Louisiana.
Yeah.
But I did learn something really neat, something new, which I always do, getting ready for this show.
Me too.
The Children's Cabinet in the state legislature. Are you familiar with that? Actually,
No.
It's the governor's cabinet. There's a proposal to extend the Children's Cabinet, and it says here that the Children's Cabinet consists of the Cabinet Secretary of each state department, and they're responsible for coordinating funding and programs at the state and local levels that serve Louisiana children and their families. I had no idea that existed in Louisiana.
I didn't either.
And that's why I wanted to bring it out. I figured, well, if I didn't know about it, there must be 2 or 3 other people out there that don't either. So, but they're looking now at they're focusing on improving public-private partnerships, which we talked about on the show with dealing
transportation
with
issue.
transportation issues. Yeah, leveraging resources and tapping federal and state and local resources in order to implement best practices for eliminating child hunger. So that was cool, and I was pleased to see that we do have a children's cabinet, so to speak. And I didn't think to check and see if any other states have those too, but. Something else with the FAMU values proposal, Lang, and then we need to get off of this, I guess, and talk about a few other things, is tackling the opioid epidemic. That's also in the proposals of the governors.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard a figure the other day that there are more deaths from opioid overdoses in Louisiana than there are from transportation deaths and violence deaths combined.
Wow. Yeah, great. Well, there's a bill authored by Helena Moreno, again, Democrat District 93, and Republican District 78, Kirk Talbot, to limit first-time prescriptions of opioids for acute pain to a 7-day supply, and also to beef up the prescription monitoring program where they keep an eye on what doctors are prescribing to whom and how often. And I'm not sure, I'm not knowledgeable enough to talk about the pros and cons of that, but at least they are acknowledging that America's drug problem is in part due to the readiness of our medical community to prescribe painkillers over the past several decades. I mean, that's big money, and
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why we have so much trouble with drug abuse in America today. I mean, there are a lot of other reasons, but that's one of them. And I'm glad to see that they're at least acknowledging that that's part of the problem.
Right, right.
Anyway, you were mentioning earlier about in your taxes and all that, people not being willing to pay more money for our prisons. And I did look at the some of the proposals for criminal justice reform. We've got about 5 minutes left. Let me try to get through this here. They're trying to reduce the number of incarcerated people in the state. And again, like I mentioned before, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. There's an article in today's Advocate saying here that long-serving inmates are at the center of the prison reform battle, and most of what the governor is proposing is to find ways of getting people out of the prison earlier than what their sentences originally called for, but it mostly is with people convicted of non-violent offenses. And they call these back-end releases. I had to look that up to find out what they were talking about. But the back-end mechanisms for release are for people that are already in prison, getting their term shortened through good time or good behavior. You know, good behavior and learning a task or learning a skill, things like that, getting an education that can help mitigate their... and I think it's a good idea. But why only people with nonviolent convictions? I mean, do we consider everybody irredeemable? I wondered about that. But they also had something, too, that really blew me away. One more really interesting thing I learned getting ready for the show was there's a bill to suspend child support payments during incarceration. And I thought, for goodness sakes, a guy goes to jail and they continue to rack up arrears in his child support, and then when they get out, and it says it right here, it requires the courts to suspend child support payments and arrears if the payer is incarcerated longer than 30 days. I mean, it's hard enough for a person who's been convicted of a crime, any crime, to get a job if they go to jail. And now a guy gets a job, or a woman gets a job, and they're going to garnish their wages by 100% or so, which it says here they do, to pay back all the money he didn't pay when he was in prison. I mean, it's like we're trying to get these guys to go back into prison, you know?
Yeah, there's no way to make it if they're taking 100% of your paycheck.
No, and they mentioned that in here. They actually said it. Or, you know, they can do that, I guess.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you have huge assets, but then why would you have not paid while you were in prison if you've got a stash of assets sitting around waiting for you when you get out, unless you got to go dig it up from wherever you buried it.
Well, that's what I was fixing to say. Maybe that's what they're trying to do, is trying to sweat it out and tell us where the money is. Tell us. But
yeah.
But yeah, there's a number of things, and then somebody mentioned a ways back, calling into this show, about all the guys up in Angola who work in their hobby shops, and I go up there and visit a friend of mine who's up there. Well, yeah, a friend of mine. What the heck? And you know, I used to walk right past the yard where the covered area that had a lot of their woodworking products, and they make a lot of neat stuff. And you know, people that go to the rodeo see all that stuff, and these are valuable skills that could benefit society in some way if we weren't so inflexible with our sentencing and our treatment of these people. But we're kind of moving along here. Let's see. We got about a minute to go, Lang. Anything else you want to share with us?
Well, there was one interesting note about the personal income tax proposal that's part of the governor's plan, which would change the individual income tax brackets to a 1%, 3%, and 5% in conjunction with eliminating a lot of the deductions that come out of there, which would result in a tax cut for 90% of personal income tax filers, because most of the huge types of exemptions are only available to people with huge incomes.
Yeah.
And so they end up paying a lot lower rate after that
Right.
calculation than if they were paying this lowered 5% without all those exemptions.
Right. Well, I wish the governor the best, and I wish our state the best in getting our fiscal problems straightened out and other things, too. We have a lot of them to fix, and hopefully we work something out that's positive this coming legislative session. You've been listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker on A Pause for Thought. We need to go. I hope you all have a good evening. Have a good night.